Hello and welcome back to my next Flosstube episode. Thank you so much to everyone who has watched my videos, who has liked, commented, shared and subscribed. If you haven't yet subscribed, I'd love for you to do that. That way you'll get notifications every time I post a new video. Make sure to press the notification bell as well. Now, where are we at? I have a couple of things to show you and some things to talk about. The first thing I have is, well, I want to say a finished object, but it's sort of more than one finished object in a way. I have my parade of penguins to show you. Second, I've been doing some work on Carmen and I want to show you that, and also talk a little bit about when that's coming out and how you'll be able to join and so on. And thirdly, a couple of people have asked in the comments on the video and elsewhere about the difference between stitching on Aida or on linen. And so what I thought I would do, I've been meaning to do for a while, is a little bit explaining the differences between different kinds of cross-stitching fabric and the terminology that's used. I don't know about you, but I found it really confusing at the start to know, people are talking about mushroom lagana here and 24 count cashel there and 38 count even weave or whatever. There's a lot of terminology, and because most of us are buying our fabric online, certainly at the moment, it's quite difficult to know in advance exactly what you're going to be getting unless you understand those sort of terms. So I thought I would just do a little explanation of that, and hopefully I'm going to try a little bit of close-up showing you the difference between stitching on Aida, even weave and linen. I'm going to do all of that at the end, because if you're someone who's an experienced cross stitcher, obviously you don't need to watch any of that. But if you're a beginner, or if you've done cross stitch but you've only ever really stitched on Aida, then you might be interested in some of that as well. I'm going to start with the penguins. So this is the cross stitch finish that I have. Say hello to Percy. This is Percy the Penguin. Percy was stitched from my December Caterpillar cross stitch subscription box. This has been a quarterly subscription box in 2021, but I believe going into 2022 she's going to do it every 2 months. You get a cross stitch pattern, you get all the floss, the fabric, you get a needle, you get what else do you get? Normally some kind of sweet treat. So this one had some of those really nice Lindor truffles in it. And then you usually get something else with this one. In fact, I don't think I've got it. Oh, here we are. You've got a matching needle minder. You don't always get a needle minder. I don't want to take the needle off that, but you can see matching Percy needle minder. And you usually get some other accessory or stitching thing. And this time we got a little wooden penguin ornament. I have an idea of what I'm going to do with that, but I'll talk to you about that in a moment. I did just want to talk to you a little bit about Percy, because I definitely haven't got the pattern right here. But if you were to look at the pattern on the Caterpillar Cross Stitch blog, it does look quite different from this. And part of that's deliberate and part of it's not. And yeah, so I just thought I'd talk to you about how I ended up with Percy looking like this. So I began with every intention to stitch it according to the pattern. I did the bow, I did the base, I started up the side of the penguin. And then, but the first thought, and this was quite a deliberate change, I thought I'd really like there to be some glitter on here. It's a penguin in a snow globe. There's no point trying to make this low key and subtle. Let's have some glitter on that. So I got some DMC Etoile and used that to stitch the snowflakes. Now on the original, the snowflakes were only in the sort of outside section, because the snowflakes were stitched on white and the body was stitched on white. So there's no point stitching white snowflakes on white. I mean, they might be there, but you couldn't see them. But I thought, well, as I'm doing mine with glitter, maybe I'll do some snowflakes over the penguin as well. So there's a little one on his hair. I mean, it's not his hair, but you know what I mean. And over his wings and on his body. So that was fun. Pleased with that decision. Carried on, got to the bow tie, decided that just a red bow tie would be jollier than a blue one. Plenty of thread for both, so that's what I thought I'd do. Fine, all fine. Carry on stitching. get around to about here. So I've just done the outline of the penguin at this stage. I've not done any of the filler. I've done his face, and I'm carrying on down here. And I don't quite know what happened at that point, but I basically failed in my counting. And as I went down and I was stitching his wing on this side and his body on this side, it became really clear that I failed on the counting. And I just thought, you know, sometimes I'll rip stitching out, and sometimes I just like, do you know what, it's fine, I'll just live with it. So I just lived with it, and I kind of made it work. And the two sides of his body are not now symmetrical, but I like to think it just makes him look as though he's slightly standing not quite front on. I think it's fine. I really do think it's fine. And, you know, and I know people are different about this. Some people really, really want to get it right because they like to get things right, and that's fine. Some people really want to get it right because they don't trust themselves to do an okay job if they make any changes. If that's you, I really encourage you to try, particularly with something like this. It's not your heirloom sampler. It's also not a huge and geometric design where one mistake is going to throw everything else off. Just have a go and wing it. You know, at worst, you've lost, I don't know, half an hour of stitching that you might have to rip out extra. It's not a big deal. Anyway, so that's what I did. So then I had, I used the étoile to do these little bits where the snow, you know, sort of builds up, the fake snow builds up on either side. So then I had my penguin stitched, except for the inside. I had done these blue little bits here. Again, here I think is correct, and here is not completely correct. And I think that's a bit more noticeable, but also couldn't be bothered to change it. And I wasn't sure. And I will tell you what I wasn't sure about from the beginning. The fabric that they sent was very, very pale ice blue. Very pale. So when you put the white thread next to it, you really had to struggle to see the difference. And I don't know if you can see it, but around the blue, there is a sort of 2-stitch wide circle that is the edge of the snow globe. And I just didn't think you'd be able to see it. But I stitched it, and I was right, you couldn't really see it. And I then thought, oh, I don't know that I love it against that background, which was not quite white, but almost white. Really, really almost white. So then it was the end of the day. I'd done quite a lot of stitching on it that one day, and I just thought, I'm going to try something. Exciting. So I got out some paints. Now, I'll link them below. These are sold as brilliant watercolours. They're not really watercolour paints. They are dye-based rather than pigment-based, and that gives them a really deep, beautiful colour. You could try this with any kind of watercolour paint you want. What I would do, and I did do this, is I cut a corner off the fabric that I knew wasn't going to finish. I knew I was going to finish in a hoop, and I knew I wasn't going to need that bit. So I cut a corner off just so that I could try. If I were to do it again, I would do it differently. I mean, if I were to do it again, honestly, it's much better if you do it earlier in the process. Just, yeah. But anyway, I had done quite a lot of stitching, and I didn't want to rip it all out, and I thought I'm just going to go for it. So I mixed up some blue and some green and did it very dilute, and had bits that were sort of bluey green and bits that were sort of greeny blue, and some bits that were just the green that seems to have come out quite yellowish. And I only put it on around the outside, and I didn't wet any of the inside. Even so, it still seeped in. It is darker on the whole on the outside than it is in the snow globe, and I'm fine with that. So I did it, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work out, and I left it overnight to dry. And when I came back, there is some bleeding into the bottom of the base here, which I decided not to do anything about. The grey, both the lighter and the darker grey, and also the red and the pink, largely escaped completely unaffected by it. Up on his face, there was some sort of around his eyes, but the lower part of the face didn't have any at all. And on the body, mostly hardly any at all, but a little bit around here. I'm looking on the back because actually I can see it a little bit easier where the dye came through on the back. But a lot of the body Didn't really have anything to speak of at all. Little bits on the eyes and a little bit down here. And the star on the original pattern was white. So I've just got a thread that's really annoying me at the back. I'm just going to snip that off. There we go. Okay, so the star at the bottom was originally white, and that had really taken up the dye, blue and green. And I didn't really love the white in the first place. I'd already been thinking, how could I make this stand out more? So all I did is I overstitched it. I didn't bother to take it out. I overstitched it with the dark grey. And then I found a red star and a white star in a little pack of confetti that I've had sitting around for years in my stash. And I layered them and glued them on. I think that looks really cool. Very pleased with that. So then I stitched all of the body and all of the face in white. Because where the dye had seeped in on the face was a bit darker and a bit more noticeable, like a little shadow here, I don't think makes any difference at all, but it was quite noticeable on the face. I used 3 strands of floss instead of 2 on the face, and I'm really glad I did that. I used just 2 strands as normal on the body. But then I did something else which I've been wanting to try for a while. I don't know where I've seen this first, so I can't link it, I'm afraid. But there's a little trick where if you get a small piece of Velcro and just use the hooky side, not the soft side, the hooky side, and press it onto your cross stitch and keep going at it, you will get a little fuzzy surface, almost like a fluffy penguin, and I just love it. I think for this penguin it is perfect. It's, again, I think if I'd planned that from the beginning, I would have done it differently. I would have. So this would be my ideal order of operations. Paint the fabric first. Then the next thing I would have done actually would be to stitch all the white and do the Velcro stuff. Because I was trying to avoid the grey and the etoile and the facial features, it's not perfect. But I think, so yeah, paint it, then do the white and do all of that. Then do the rest of the stitching. Bob's your uncle. Would have been really great. Anyway, it's not what I did, but it's fine. And so then the last thing I did, the white around the edge of the snow globe had really taken up the dye, which was not a surprise. And I just thought it needed a little bit more definition. And I'm still on the fence about whether I did the right thing with this or not. I thought about stitching an extra circle round of white. Didn't want it that much. I thought about back stitching it in white. I'm still wondering if I should have done that, to be honest. But what I ended up doing was back stitching it in a very, very pale, slightly blue-grey. Up front, up close, I think it works. Hanging on the wall, I'm not sure you can see it, and I think maybe the white would have been better. But that was my Percy Penguin. Painted the hoop, I knew I wanted a hoop finish, painted the hoop red to match, thought I'd finished, and then I remembered the pom-poms that I had. And these, I don't know if I've got a bit to show you. No, it's pom-pom trim that's not really designed for this kind of use. It's got quite big loops that the pom-poms are on. They would sort of come out to about here all the way around and then sort of dangle down. So I glued the braid part of the trim onto the edge of the hoop, and then I took each of the dangling pom-poms and I was going to glue them all on, but they weren't really sticking with the tacky glue, and I couldn't be able to go and find my hot glue gun. Still don't know where it is. So I just sort of stitched through the pom-pom onto the braid, and that's holding them in place. And then I did glue on the one on the top. And I think he's lovely. I think he's really lovely. I think the pom-pom trim is perfect. I'm really glad I went for the red bow tie. I'm really glad I did the fuzzy body and the painted background. Like I say, there's things that if I'd planned it from the beginning I would have done differently, but I'm not at all disappointed with that finish. That is Percy Penguin. Let me show you my other penguin. This is Penelope. Penelope Penguin we made in my art class this term. She is a mixing bowl, 50p from Tesco, some cardboard and a balloon. She is papier-mâchéed. She's had her wings added, her feet added. They've got lovely velvet on the bottom of the feet. I made her a beak, slightly added a bit of dimension for her eyes, painted her this part of the body, and can you see going into this bit of hair that's a little bit fuzzy, that's a organza fabric that I've papier-mâchéed in bits all over her body and then left fluffing up here. She has got sequins, she has got obviously enormous goggly eyes. I had never seen non-white googly eyes before, but I found that pack in Hobbycraft that also came with blue and green and red, maybe, can't remember. I gave her, she's a party penguin obviously, so I gave her some jeweled slippers to wear. She's got jewels on her wings and a little bit of pom-pom, and the same on the other side. I found these glittery pom-poms in my stash, and so I put her name on there, and obviously I knitted her a jumper. But she also, and I don't know if you can see this, has a slightly fuzzy tummy. What I used on her tummy was strips of very fine muslin cloth torn into half-inch strips and glued over each other so that you've got the fraying edges, and I just really love how that feels. So yeah, we were supposed to be doing papier-mâché and painting it, and I was all like, oh, can I do collage, can I do this? And then the lady who sits next to me in art said, why don't you do fabric, Ros, because she knows I love doing textile stuff. And suddenly, so anyway, we have Percy and we have Penelope and Pingu. Pingu, as I said, came with the caterpillar cross stitch box. I think Pingu would like to be a little miniature pin cushion. So a little tiny stitched something in here, popping out to give him a nice round belly, and probably a flat back so he can just sit on my stitching table and have a little tiny pin cushion in him. And I don't know, maybe I'll paint or decorate him, or maybe I'll leave him as he is. But I think a little pin cushion stomach is the plan for Pingu. So that is my parade of penguins. So Carmen is the other thing obviously that I've been working on by way of cross stitch, and she is here. I haven't got board. I should have something to hold her against. Give me a minute. So this is Carmen. This is where I've got to. I've started the first 3 rows of alphabet and numbers, and the first 3 border patterns. You can see the border patterns are really tiny and simple and quick to do. You would not think that one of those needed to be ripped out and restitched 3 times. I promise you that is not an issue with the pattern. It is not an issue with the design. It is just an issue with me. And I think, to be honest, if I had just been stitching this for me, I would have let it go, certainly the second time, probably just the first time. But because I'm doing this and I'm wanting to check that everything works on the chart that I've done, I wanted to make sure I'd actually done it right. So I did redo that. It was this one here. Just kept starting it. Well, so initially I'd started it a stitch too far along, and then half a stitch too far the other way, and then I managed to do it. I was just doing this sort of, it's got a little sort of pink insert, and then you do the green around it, and I was doing the pink inserts, and I just, there's, you know, it's 2 stitches and then leave 1, 2 stitches and leave 1, and I just managed to leave 2 stitches in one place, so it was all out. Anyway, it is now correct. This has got not quite all the colours on it yet. There's one colour that I haven't yet used, but almost all the colours. I'm stitching this one in the Sulky thread palette, and I'm really enjoying that. I know it looks quite sort of dominant with this yellow here, but I think by the time the whole thing is done, it won't. There will be flashes of yellow, but it won't be like, oh wow, look at that yellow, in quite the way that it is at the moment. But I think they're all stitching up really nicely. They're all really clear against the fabric background. I think it's a really fun stitch. one of the things I'm really enjoying about it is that for each pair of letters or numbers, you don't need a long thread, and you can do them in, 5 minutes. So even if you only got a few minutes every day, you can sit down and you can put in a thread and you'll have measurable progress. What I hate is those kind of patterns where you feel like you've done half an hour of stitching, you can't tell what you have done. It looks no different. But in this, it really does look different. You can always tell you're further on in the alphabet, or further on in the numbers, or even with the borders, that you will have made in 10-15 minutes. Noticeable progress, and I think that really helps to stitch through. So this is not loads of time stitching. This is maybe 2-3 hours at most, even including the unpicking. So I don't think this is going to take forever, which is a good thing. And so what I am aiming to have done and checked thoroughly so that I can release the chart for this section on New Year's Day is as far as here, plus the border that comes underneath here, all the way across. So I think it's about the width of this. So I haven't quite done half of that, but I'm not at all worried that I won't be able to get that completed all the way across by Saturday. So that's where she's at. Yeah, it's a really, really nice, not too stressful, not complicated stitch. There is counting, but it's not, despite my complete failure, it's not complicated counting, I promise you. My recommendation would be to start with this very top border, because it's a really, really easy one to stitch and it's virtually impossible to lose count on. Even I have not lost count on it. It's just a little checkerboard, 3-row checkerboard pattern. And you could even do that across the whole width before you do anything else. It's easy to count because it's a checkerboard pattern. Yeah, it's easy to get right, and then you'll know where you are on the thing, and you'll be able to then count using that to get all your letters in the right place going forward. And then counting from row to row is always much easier, and you can see exactly where the stitches fall. So that would be my suggestion, is to start with that. And I think probably I wanted to just go down and start this next border, and then I'm going to go all the way across, and then I'll have the sort of area that I'm doing demarcated to fill in with the rest of the letters and the numbers. So that's how she's getting on. I really am enjoying her, like I say, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you hopefully join in and stitch as well. So that's all I've got by way of finished projects and works in progress. I haven't got any actual haul that has arrived. I have ordered some. Just this morning, actually, I have ordered my Christmas present to myself. I think that's a very important thing to do. I don't know when I will get around to starting on this, but I will just tell you, I'll perhaps try and insert a photo. I was watching Laurie Holt's Flosstube, where she was going through all her Christmas projects, and she talked about one project that immediately made me think, I really want to do that. She started it, I think maybe it was her Boxing Day start last year, something like that, and she called it her Sabbath Project. So she begins it at Christmas and then works on it every Sunday. I assume she has Sunday Sabbath, every Sabbath anyway, throughout the year. And I was like, that's a really lovely idea. And she had chosen this chart. I will try and put a picture here. It's called A Saviour's Praise, and I just love it. It's got a verse from Now Thank We All Our God, and then it's got this beautiful, in fact I'm just going to look at a picture. Yeah, so it's got a verse from Now Thank We All Our God, which I think is a lovely, lovely hymn. It's got an alphabet across the top. It's got a flower basket with space if you want to put initials. I haven't decided what I will do with that. I love this row of trees. I'm sort of waving my hand vaguely here. I don't know what you can see. I'm going to stop doing that. It's got this really lovely row of trees that are not uniform, and I really love that. They are stylized, but they are, not uniform, and they've got these little birds on top, and it's so adorable. And a little house, It's got the stitcher's name across the middle, and she was from Crowborough, I think. Then we've got a little bit more. I'm not sure where this voice comes. What words, what voices can we bring? Which way our accents raise to welcome thy mysterious king, and sing a saviour's praise. And then the date, and then at the bottom, I'm not quite sure what these are. I can't quite see, but I think they might be reindeer across the bottom, and then flowers. And then, but the thing that I loved about it most, you know, I like that as a sampler with all the border and stuff, but the border on it is just spectacular. It is not a repeating border. It's not a geometric border. You know, the border in itself is beautiful. I love that it has the sort of Christian virtues. So across the top, faith, joy, hope, but the greatest of these is love. And then coming down, peace and patience, right judgment on the other side, resourcefulness, kindness, humility, and then all intertwined with these lovely images, the ship, and there's another little house, and fruit and flowers, and a little pair of scissors. Next to patience, it's got scissors and a little spool of thread, and just so much in it that is just adorable. It is a big sampler. It's twice as big as Carmen in both directions. So if this is Carmen, this is on 32 count. If you did it on 32 count, it would be out to here and sort of down and around. It, you know, it's a beast. They recommend stitching it on 40 count, and I have ordered some 40 count linen to do it on. I'm a bit nervous about how well I'll be able to see and whether I really enjoy doing it on that, but also I just don't have space to put a sampler that enormous. So yeah, we will see. I mean, it will still be bigger than Carmen by some way, but it will be a little bit more manageable. So I've ordered it from Fobbles in the UK. There are a couple of places that it was out of stock, but it does seem to be available fairly freely. Fobbles had a matching DMC thread pack, so I've ordered that. I may not use all of those, but I thought, well, at least that will give me a good start, and I'll see if there's some that I want to substitute in or out. And I also ordered a piece of 40 count Newcastle linen in antique white, I think. I'll check. I'll show you when it all comes anyway. It might even be the same dye as this, I'm not certain, but I wanted it on a light background, and that was what they had in the 40 count and the right sort of size, so that's what I've ordered, and I'm looking forward to seeing when it arrives. I'm not making any promises about when I either start it or finish it. Carmen will come first. So that is where I think I'm going to move on to talking about cross stitch fabrics and stitching. So, you know, if you already know all of that, do feel free to stop off here, and I'll see you next time. There will be a brief little video coming on January the 1st, which will be the sort of here where you'll download all Carmen's charts, here's some tips about stitching her, and I will have the whole of the first section finished to show you at that point as well. I'll put all that information on Instagram as well as in the little video here on YouTube. It's Ros Clark Craft on Instagram as well as here on YouTube. I would love it if you would join me in stitching Carmen's sampler in January, or indeed at any point in the coming year. Do use the hashtag CarmenSAL if you're posting on Instagram, so that I can see photos of the threads you've chosen, the fabric you've chosen, and when you get started on stitching. All of my posts are using that hashtag CarmenSAL, Carmen Stitch Along. Great, now I've got some things to show you, because we're going to do this talking about different kinds of fabric. What I'm going to try and do is move so that you've got a top-down view and you can see things in more detail, and hopefully that will work. So this is stitched on a piece of Ada. This is a D-stash piece that somebody gave me with their stitching on. You can see the weave in the Ada, which is the absolutely typical thing where there's a tight weave and then a hole that's left, and you stitch into the holes to form nice, neat, square cross stitches. The only disadvantage of Ada is that where you don't stitch, you still see the holes. That's why for some kinds of pieces, I prefer to stitch on a linen or an even weave, where the fabric as a whole doesn't have those really distinctive holes in it from the Ada. So when you do your stitching, you don't have to worry about doing a full coverage piece. Even the parts that are left unstitched look really nice where the fabric is. It doesn't have those holes in it, and so you're stitching just into normal fabric. You can see this is a similar piece. This is, I think this might, well, no, I think it is technically an even weave, but it does have a little bit more slub to it, where the threads are not all precisely the same. You can see a little close up here where the threads is a bit thicker. The stitches won't be quite as even. Now, I'm going to attempt to show you stitching on this even weave piece, and this is not going to go well, I warn you now. It's quite difficult to do it at this weird angle and also in close up and keep it in frame and keep it in focus. I apologise, but I hope there will be enough that you can see what I'm doing. I'm stitching over 2 threads on this even weave fabric. Okay, you always want to keep your top leg of your cross stitch going in the same direction. And what I'm doing, I'm counting 2 strands of the woven fabric between each place where I put my needle. So I'm coming across 2 strands further across from my previous stitch ended. And then I'm going up to the corner so that the stitch still forms a square. Under each stitch, there'll be 2 strands going horizontally, 2 strands going vertically. Okay, so I'm just counting 2 up, across, 2 down, and then that's going to join on to the next one. I'm just going to do a little row of these so that you can see how they look. It's pretty painful watching me trying to find the right place to come up. Okay, but hopefully when it's in focus, you can see what I'm doing, the 2 strands across and the 2 strands down to make these nice square stitches. So the reason why you would choose this fabric is because it looks nice in the background, but you don't have to make smaller stitches. This is 28 count linen, and you could get the same size result on a 14 count Ada. Effectively, I'm doing 14 stitches per inch, even though there's 28 threads per inch. Of course, this does then have the flexibility that if you wanted to, you can make half stitches. If you're doing a design that's got fractional stitches in it, half stitches or quarter stitches, but also if you wanted to stitch over 1, you don't have to stitch over 2 threads of fabric. You can stitch, if you're slightly mad, over 1. So I'm just doing a little example here of what those stitches look like if you were to stitch just 1 thread horizontally and 1 thread vertically. I'm sorry, it does keep going in and out of focus. I don't know how to do this properly. So again, I'm just making the cross, still going the same direction. You can see how tiny those stitches are compared to the over 2. Normally, if you were doing this, if you use 2 strands of embroidery floss to stitch over 2, you would only use 1 strand to stitch over 1. I'm using a sulky, which doesn't have strands, and it's a bit thick for doing this, but hopefully you'll be able to see. And obviously, because you're only going half as far along and half as far down, you get 4 stitches, 4 of these tiny stitches that make up the same size as a single stitch 2 over 2. So it's a lot more work if you're stitching 1 over 1, if you want to cover the same sort of size ground. In Carmen sampler, almost all of it is 2 over 2, which works perfectly if you want to use it on Ada. But there is a little section where she stitched her name, where she stitched 1 over 1. I am going to stitch it 1 over 1, but I'm also going to give you options if you don't want to do 1 over 1, or if you're stitching on Ada, where it's very difficult to do 1 over 1. Right, so there, you can see, oh, go on, hold it in focus, hold it in focus. There we go. Okay, so you can see those stitches, and hopefully you can see what you're doing if you're stitching over 2 and what you're doing if you're stitching over 1. 2 threads horizontally, 2 threads vertically under every stitch for over 2. So here you can see what I've already done on Carmen. hopefully you can see how each of those crosses has two threads from the fabric going underneath it, horizontally and also vertically. If you look at the gaps between stitches in the borders particularly, hopefully you can see how there's two strands horizontally, two strands vertically, and so there are those holes in the middle, and that will give you a good idea of how you stitch 2 over 2. With this, I've tried not to carry threads, so you can see on the back, because you're doing each pair of letters or numbers in one colour and then changing, I really wouldn't recommend trying to take your thread from one section to another. Just do each pair and then finish and start a new thread. Obviously you can use your previous stitching to start and finish with tucking your yarn, your thread in, but I wouldn't try and carry it across the fabric at the back. You don't want it to show through, and there's no need to, I think, given the way this sampler is put together. So the other thing I did want to talk to you about is fabric type and buying fabric and fabric names. Most cross-stitch fabric that's sold here in the UK is from Zweigart. There are other manufacturers and they're perfectly fine, but you will find that most fabric in most shops comes from Zweigart. Even where it is hand-dyed fabric or hand-printed or painted, often they will have used a Zweigart base on which to do that. Zweigart, I think, have the most complicated, unnecessary naming system for their fabrics in the world. I think it's very confusing. Their names indicate both stitch count and fabric composition. So first of all, in their linen fabrics, the stitch count is represented by the name of a place, either in the UK or Ireland. So you have Cashel linen, which is 28 count, Belfast, which is 32, Edinburgh, can't remember, Dublin, I think, is 35, Newcastle is 40. So it doesn't tell you anything about where the fabric is actually made or anything else about colour or what it's used for or whatever. The name represents the stitch count. Because it's a stupid system, people always end up using the stitch count anyway. So they will say 28 count Cashel linen. The Cashel just means it's 28 count. Then they also have names which represent the fabric composition. And I haven't got a list of all of these in front of me, I'm afraid. But you'll see things like Jobelan, which I think is a mix of linen and rayon, or Lugana, which I want to say is a mixture of cotton and rayon, but don't quote me on that. But you can see they will feel very different in the hand. They will be drapier or stiffer or more rustic or smoother. And then you get names, fabrics which are named for both their stitch count and their composition. So a Lugana Brittany, which is maybe a 28 count Lugana, a Lugana Balana, maybe 20 count. I genuinely can't remember it all. But then when somebody dyes the fabric, or even if you're just buying Zweigart fabric, you'll also get a label for the colour of the fabric. So you might see something advertised as 28 count Mushroom Lugana or 28 count Brittany Lugana. It's an unnecessarily complex code, in my opinion. I think they would be much better off just labelling it according to actual stitch count, actual composition, and then a name for the colour. But they don't. So if you are buying fabric, those are the things to look out for. Fabric count to give you an idea of the size of your stitching, but also the size of the finished piece. Composition will tell you how drapey or smooth it will be. And colour to suit whatever it is you happen to be stitching. So I hope that was helpful. Do let me know if you have any specific questions about cross-stitch fabric or cross-stitching in general. And I hope to see you next time.